Today we will study about Mendelssohn, Grieg, program music, and nationalism. You'll notice that Grieg, in particular, wrote a lot of nationalistic music. Be sure to read pages 290 to 296 and 305 to 308.
The next composer we will study is Felix Mendelssohn. He was born in 1809 and died in 1847, so another composer who died young. But he had a great life, and so let's study a little bit about him. Mendelssohn was born in Hamburg, Germany, to a wealthy and famous family. So unlike many of our other composers we've had, where they came from more obscure, unknown families who struggled to make it financially, perhaps, Mendelssohn came from a very wealthy family, very well-to-do, and very famous. When he was 9 years old, he was a concert pianist. So similar to Beethoven and Mozart and some of our other composers we've studied, he was performing when he was very young on stages. When he was 13, he began writing symphonies, concertos, sonatas, and vocal works. So again, many of the famous composers who we still study today began composing when they were very young. At age 17, he composed his first recognized masterpiece. So the way this kind of worked is that during his teen years, his family had Sunday musicales where their private orchestra, they had employed their own private orchestra, would play Mendelssohn's compositions. And I'm sure they would give him suggestions and ways to improve, and he would hear his works and develop them. And so his first masterpiece that is still played regularly today, he wrote when he was only 17. At age 20, he conducted Bach's St. Matthew Passion, which was the beginning of a rediscovery of Bach's music. Bach's music had been stashed away in attics, and actually his wife had wrapped some ailing trees with them during the winter. And as I said in the past, music that was used maybe during the church service or the prince owned the music to that the previous conductor had used, they often discarded all that because a new composer and conductor would come in and write new material. And so the previous composer's music was just stashed away somewhere. Well, Mendelssohn came across some of Bach's music and said, I think this stuff is pretty good. And he conducted this performance of St. Matthew's Passion years after Bach's death. And it caught on, and everybody was like, wow, who is this great composer? And so it was a revival of Bach's music. When Mendelssohn was 26, he became a conductor of a major orchestra. Remember, we said how that most of the large towns had their own orchestras with concert series, and when Mendelssohn was just 26 years old, he became a conductor of one of these major orchestras. And at age 33, he founded the Leipzig Conservatory of Music. Again, this is the era when all these conservatories are developing and opening up, where students study just about the arts and just about music. And they're not studying the English or the sciences, they're just studying about music. In addition to composing, he painted, he was a writer, and he spoke in 4 languages fluently. So this man was just absolutely brilliant. He was happily married, and they had 4 children. So things were going really well for him, but he tended to overwork himself, and he became so exhausted. And then his sister passed away. So after the death of his sister, it led to declining health for him, and he died at the age of 38. So died way too young because he had such great music that was coming out. He was doing such great work with the Leipzig Conservatory, and he just overdid himself and did not take care of himself, and he died at the age of 38. Arguably, one of the greatest violin concertos of all time is the Violin Concerto in E minor by Mendelssohn. And it is a piece that is more accessible than some of the other violin concertos. And so lots of high school students and college students learn this piece and perform it at concerto competitions, and they win concerto competitions with it and are able to play then with larger orchestras. And these concertos are getting longer. During the Romantic era, they get longer. We will listen to only the first movement, which lasts over 12 minutes. And so you have the coda that starts 11 minutes and 14 seconds in. But it's in this sonata form. You have your exposition. Remember, we talked about that's where your first melody is exposed. Then you have your bridge. Then there is the second theme, which is often there for these longer pieces, followed by the development, where you develop the themes that you've been introduced to at the beginning. And then you have the cadenza actually comes earlier in this piece instead of after the recapitulation. The cadenza comes after the development. Then you have the recapitulation of the first theme, a bridge into the second theme, and then you have the coda at the end. So this is just a wonderful piece, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. One of my favorite composers, who is not even included in our textbook, is Edvard Grieg. And since he's one of my favorite composers, we're going to study about him because I love his music, and I think he is just seems like he was such a nice guy. So Edvard Grieg was born in 1843, and he died in 1907. So a little longer life than some of the composers we've been studying most recently. Grieg lived his entire life in Norway. He was born in Norway, and he died in Norway. He was not a big traveler. He was a composer and a pianist and an organist. And this is one of, other than Bach, we don't have a whole lot of organists who were composers as well. And so I think that's kind of cool. He did not like school. He felt like school was too restraining. He felt like it was limiting his ability to express himself. And he felt like it was just too confining and restricting. And so he kind of branched out and did some new things outside of the constraints of schooling and what the schools were telling him what to write. And something that he really got involved in was nationalistic music. He wrote lots of nationalistic and program music, which we're going to study some of his pieces that fall under this category. He was very happily married. Unfortunately, they only had one child, which was a daughter, and she died when she was only a year old. So that was a tragedy that happened to the family, and then they never had any more children. Now, we talked about Franz Liszt the other day. Franz Liszt, after he had his big, successful career, then spent his middle years reaching out to new composers and new performers and trying to help their career along. And he discovered Grieg. And he just loved Grieg's piano concerto and really helped to promote the music of Grieg and helped make Grieg famous. Grieg actually died when he was 64, so he lived to a nice, ripe old age, and he died of heart failure. So that was not an uncommon thing back then, and not an uncommon thing today. So kind of nothing too out of the ordinary there. And upon his death and at his funeral, the streets of his hometown were lined from between 30,000 and 40,000 admirers following his funeral procession. So he was loved by all the people there in Norway. And actually he was cremated, and his ashes were buried in a mountain there near his home. And then after his wife died, she was also cremated and buried in this mountain in Troldhaugen, where actually one of his pieces later on that we'll study is the wedding day at Troldhaugen. And so just a sweet story of a lovely couple and a great life for Grieg and great music. On page 295, you'll read about program music. Program music is instrumental music associated with a story, poem, idea, or scene. And so music can imitate certain sounds such as bird songs or the rumble of thunder or the clang of bells or the howling of the wind or a running stream or the rise and fall of waves. And so it was really popular during the Romantic era to have the music represent these visual aspects of the art form. It was similar to what Vivaldi was doing in the Four Seasons. And so he was almost ahead of his time there, representing all of the different sounds of nature. But it was very, very popular during this era. The program music was almost always written for piano or for orchestra. And so the piece that I have selected for us to listen to is the Peer Gynt Suite by Edvard Grieg. Peer Gynt is a character of a story character from Norway. And so Peer Gynt was not only having program music, but he was being nationalistic by writing about this folklore character from Norway. And so Peer Gynt sets out on an adventure. So the first thing that happens on his adventure is that, of course, he gets up. And so it's morning, and you hear this song called Morning. And so the piece just sounds like early morning, and he's getting up and looking out the window and thinking, I need to go on an adventure. I need to go somewhere exciting. So he's traveling. While he's traveling and he's on his journeys, he comes across this beautiful young woman, and he's just enticed by her, and she tells him, you should come and meet my father. He is the king of the mountain. And so she says, oh, and he will give you high honors, and it will be great things will be done for you if you will come with me, because my father is the king of the mountain. So he follows her to the mountain, and they actually go inside the mountain. And as he gets inside the mountain, he realizes this is a trick and it is a trap. And all the people who are dwelling there are trolls in the hall of the Mountain King. And so he's fixing to be captured by all these trolls. And so he's barely able to make an escape, and he escapes just barely within an inch of his life. And so he does more traveling, and you'll hear Anitra's dance, which is like a belly dance type song, where he goes over into India, where they're having all these belly dancers and all this travel. And so then he decides it's time to go home. And so you get Peer Gynt's homecoming. On his way home, you can hear in the music, there is this horrible storm. He's on a ship sailing home, and this horrible storm comes up, and he almost drowns because it almost swamps the boat. But he is able to make it home. And so you'll hear all these musical descriptions of the storyline in this program music. So you'll have morning in the Hall of the Mountain King, and then Peer Gynt's homecoming, which is telling the story through music. Click on the YouTube links to hear these 3 pieces. On page 305, you will read about nationalism in 19th century music. This is where the composers deliberately gave their works a distinctive national identity. The way they did this is that they used folk songs, dances, and they created original melodies with a folk flavor that represented their country. Program music was inspired by the history, legends, and landscapes of their native lands. And that's what they were doing. They were saying, I don't want my music to sound like music of Germany or music of Austria or music from some other country. I want it to sound like it is from my own country. And so we will study later on, even in America, music is sounding like it is from America and not from Germany. And Grieg was writing music that he wanted to sound like it was Norwegian music and not music from a different country. This was especially true in countries occupied by Napoleon's troops. They were being taken over by someone else, by another country, and they didn't appreciate that, and so they were really holding tightly onto their traditions and to their history, and so the composers were writing lots of music that represented their own country and not France or Napoleon. So I'm going to have you listen to Wedding Day at Troldhaugen by Grieg. And again, Troldhaugen was the area where Grieg lived. And this is music that represents a wedding celebration in Troldhaugen. It's just a great piece. I hope you enjoy it. Another great piece of nationalistic / program music is Pictures at an Exhibition by Mussorgsky, arranged by Ravel. So Modest Mussorgsky actually originally wrote this for piano only. And Maurice Ravel came around later in 1922 and said, I think this would be great as an orchestra piece. And so he took the piano pieces by Modest Mussorgsky and orchestrated them. And nowadays, the orchestral version of the Pictures at an Exhibition is probably more popular and more widely heard than the piano version. But the piano version was the original. You can read about Pictures at an Exhibition on page 307, and then our listening guide is on page 308. Mussorgsky was the son of a wealthy landowner, and he was educated in a military academy and became an army officer when he was only 17. And after 2 years, he left the army to devote himself to music. Now, the Pictures at an Exhibition. This is the story of one of Mussorgsky's friends actually was a painter. And he had painted all of these pictures and had put them up on display. And Mussorgsky was inspired to write this music as he saw the pictures at the exhibition, based on whatever the picture was. And the first one we're going to listen to is the Great Gate of Kiev. And you see a picture, you see actually the original picture that inspired this piece. Interestingly, the picture that is here was a recommendation for what the Great Gate of Kiev should look like. But there were multiple pictures submitted as to how the gate should look. And this was not the final selection for how the Great Gate of Kiev should actually look. So this is just a suggestion as to what it should have looked like, but it was not the one that was selected. So I hope you enjoy listening to the Great Gate of Kiev. I couldn't leave the Pictures at an Exhibition without showing a few of the other musical representations of the pictures that were on exhibit that Mussorgsky saw. So the first one you'll hear is the hut on Fowl's Legs, called Baba Yaga. So this one's kind of a weird one. The picture itself is kind of odd, and as you watch the YouTube video, you will actually see the picture that inspired this, and they put a little animation to it, and so it's an interesting sounding piece. Then you have the Ballet of Unhatched Chicks, and again, you'll see the picture that goes with that. And then finally, you'll listen to the Children's Quarrel after games, and you'll hear a lot of sort of nya 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 throughout the piece. It's just done with instruments, but you hear this da dum da dum da 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 da, and so it kind of goes along with what even children still today say when they're quarreling and taunting one another. So I hope you enjoy these other three movements of Pictures at an Exhibition.
I love the way music is telling a story during the Romantic era, even if you don't have words or a text to go with it, or even a poem to go with it. You can tell that there's a storyline, the way the music is written, the way the instruments are used to create a musical picture and tell a musical story, even if there are no words at all. So actually, as we discussed earlier, Mendelssohn was great for writing a song without words. And so it was a song and telling a story that didn't even have to have words. So great music and nationalistic music representing their country. I hope you enjoyed this unit.